The voicemails kept stacking up. I could see them piling in, one after another, the little red badge on my phone climbing from 3 to 7 to 12, all before I'd even finished my morning coffee. My sister. My mom. My sister, again. Then a number I didn't recognize, which somehow felt like the most ominous one of all. I set the mug down on the counter, crossed my arms, and just watched the screen light up like a slot machine that had finally run out of coins to give. I didn't answer. I hadn't answered in 4 days. And honestly, it was the most peaceful 4 days I'd had in 2 years. If you're wondering how a 29-year-old woman ends up ignoring her entire family from the kitchen of a house she worked herself half to death to own, well, pull up a chair. Because this one didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because I'm cold, or selfish, or any of the other words my sister has probably already used to describe me to everyone who will listen. It happened because I finally stopped waiting for people who were never going to change. My name is Claire. Claire Delaney. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, second of 2 daughters, which sounds perfectly ordinary until you understand the specific math of how love was divided in our house. My sister Amber is 4 years older than me, and from the very beginning, she occupied a different category in my parents' minds. She was the firstborn, the one who got the bedroom with the window seat, the one whose school plays were recorded on an actual camcorder, while mine got a few blurry photos on a flip phone. It wasn't malicious. I don't think my parents ever sat down and decided to love her more. It was just the quiet arithmetic of attention, and somehow Amber always ended up with the larger sum. She was charming in a way I never quite figured out how to be, loud in rooms where I went quiet. She laughed easily and cried dramatically and always made sure every feeling she had was visible from across the room. I was the one who processed things alone, the one who figured it out quietly and moved on. My parents interpreted this as me being fine. They were mostly right, except for all the ways they were wrong. By the time I was 16, I had a part-time job at a dry cleaner 2 blocks from school. I liked having my own money. I liked not having to ask. When I graduated high school, I got a small scholarship and took out loans for the rest, and I worked through every semester, alternating between a coffee shop near campus and whatever freelance bookkeeping jobs I could pick up online. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in accounting and a very clear understanding that no one was coming to rescue me financially, so I had better be precise about the numbers in my own life. Amber graduated too, eventually, after 6 years, 2 major changes, and what my mom gently called a difficult period that lasted about 3 of those years. She got a job in marketing, rented a nice apartment with her boyfriend Derek, and for a while, things seemed fine. She was happy. Derek seemed decent enough. The 4 of us would get dinner a couple of times a year, and it was pleasant and surface level and completely manageable. Then Derek left. I won't get into all of it because honestly, I only ever got Amber's version, which was dramatic and one-sided and delivered in installments every time she called me crying for the next several months. What I understood was that they'd been living together, they broke up, she needed to find somewhere new to live, and her lease was up in 30 days. I had just closed on my house 8 months before that call. A 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, not fancy, but mine. I'd saved for 6 years for that down payment, eaten a lot of sad lunches at my desk, skipped vacations, driven a car that made a sound I pretended not to hear. The house was the thing I had been working toward since I was 19 years old, tallying up numbers at a dry cleaner. And the day I got the keys, I sat on the empty living room floor and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a kid. So when Amber called asking if she could stay with me for just a couple of months while she got back on her feet, I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my sister, she was devastated. She had nowhere else to go. My parents lived 3 hours away in a 1-bedroom condo they'd downsized into after retirement, so that wasn't really an option. I had the space. I had the room. I said yes. I said 2 months, and I meant it. The first month was fine. She was quiet and sad and stayed mostly in the guest room, and we watched a lot of television together, and it felt almost like we were close, the way sisters are supposed to be. She didn't have a job yet, but she said she was applying. She helped with dishes sometimes. She asked before she ate the last of something. I thought, okay, this is working. The second month, she started going out more. A new group of friends, she said. Networking. She'd come home at 2 in the morning on weekdays and sleep until noon, and when I gently mentioned the job search, she said she had some leads and changed the subject. I didn't push. She was going through something. I understood that. Month 3, I brought up rent. Not a lot. I wasn't trying to profit off my sister's misfortune. I sat down with her at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with 2 cups of coffee, and I said, "Hey, I love having you here, but I do need some help with the bills. Could you do $300 a month? Just to cover the extra utilities and groceries." She looked at me like I'd asked her to sign over a kidney. "Claire," she said, "I'm your sister. I'm going through the hardest time of my life." She let that sit in the air. Then, "I can't believe you're making this about money right now." I didn't say much after that. I backed off. I told myself she was still healing, still adjusting. I would bring it up again in another few weeks when she was more settled. But a few weeks became another month, and another month became 6, and at some point I stopped counting the months and started counting the ways the situation had shifted without me ever agreeing to let it. Her friend Marcus started coming over. Every weekend at first, then a few weeknights too. He was pleasant enough, but he was another body in the house, another plate at the table, another set of shoes by the door. I found his razor in the bathroom and said nothing. I found him in my kitchen making eggs at midnight and smiled and went back to bed. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself this was temporary. Her packages started arriving. At first, it was normal things, clothes, books, the kind of deliveries anyone might get, but then it became a steady stream. Several a day. Stacked on my porch in towers I'd nearly trip over coming home from work. I asked her about it once, casually, and she said she'd gotten into reselling. Vintage stuff, she said. Thrifting and flipping, nothing serious. I nodded and thought nothing more of it. Until the letter came from the county. It was addressed to something called Amber Rose Resale, LLC, at my address. I held that envelope in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. I set it on the counter and went to my room and sat on my bed and let the weight of what I was understanding settle over me slowly. She had registered a business. At my house. My address was listed as the official address of a limited liability company I had never heard of, had never consented to host, and had never been asked about. I opened my laptop and looked her up. The business had been registered for 11 months. 11 months. She'd moved in less than a week before that filing date. I found her Etsy shop. Nearly 400 sales. Solid reviews. One customer had left a note that said fast shipping and great communication, love this seller. Another said I've ordered from her 3 times and she never disappoints. I sat there in the blue light of my laptop screen, doing the math, not the numbers I could see, but the ones I couldn't. All those packages on my porch. All those trips to thrift stores she said were just for fun. All those mornings she slept in while I drove to the office and sat through budget meetings and ate my sad lunches at my desk. She had been running a business out of my house, using my address, paying 0 rent, and telling me she was struggling to get back on her feet. I closed the laptop. I didn't say anything that night. I needed to think. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid closer attention. I watched the packages come and go. I noticed how she photographed items in my living room under the natural light of my south-facing window, which I'd always loved because it was good for plants. She had set up a little staging area behind the couch that I'd assumed was just her clutter. It was not clutter, it was a photography setup. She had a small ring light she kept folded behind the bookshelf. I checked the business registration again and looked up what it would cost to use a commercial address versus a residential one in our county. I looked up what her shop was roughly earning based on her average sale price and volume. The number I landed on was somewhere between $1,800 and $2,400 a month. She had been earning $2,000 a month out of my house while telling me she couldn't contribute $300. I want to be fair here. I don't know exactly how much she was making. Reselling has costs, inventory, shipping, supplies. Maybe the profit was less than I calculated. But here is what I know for certain, she was not broke. She was not struggling. She was running a legitimate small business and living rent-free in my house and eating my groceries and letting Marcus use my shower, and somehow, I was the one who had never asked for anything. I thought about how to bring it up for days. I rehearsed different versions of the conversation, gentle ones, firm ones, the kind where I stayed completely calm and the kind where I said everything I actually thought. I decided on calm. I decided on honest. I decided on one afternoon when Marcus was not there and it was just the two of us, and I had given myself enough time to make sure my hands weren't shaking. I asked her to sit down. She looked at me from across the kitchen table and something shifted in her face, some very small tightening, like she already knew. I know about the business, I said. She opened her mouth and I kept going. I know you registered it at my address 11 months ago, which was basically when you moved in. I know you've been running it from here, I know you've been making money. And I know you told me you couldn't help with $300 a month because you were struggling. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then, you've been snooping through my stuff. I shook my head. You registered a business at my home address, Amber. I got mail for your LLC. I just looked up public records. She leaned back and crossed her arms and did the thing she'd been doing since we were children, that slow exhale through the nose that meant she was deciding how angry to be. I'm building something, she said. You know how hard it is to start a business. I can't afford to pay rent and invest in inventory at the same time. You've had 11 months, I said. Things take time, Claire. I need you to pay rent, I said. Actual rent. $600 a month, which is below market, and I need back pay for the last 11 months. We can figure out a payment plan for that part. She laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that means I cannot believe you. You're my sister, she said. This is your family. You're really going to charge me rent like I'm a stranger off Craigslist? You've been running a business out of my home without asking me, I said. You've been making money. You told me you couldn't spare $300. Those are facts. She stood up. Her voice went up a register. I have given you so much, Claire. I've been here for you your whole life. When Mom and Dad went through that thing with the money, who was the one who came and stayed with you so you weren't alone? When you had that breakdown in college. I didn't have a breakdown. You were struggling, she said, and I was there. You visited me once for a weekend in 4 years of college, I said. I appreciate it, but that doesn't mean you get to live in my house and use it as a business address indefinitely for free. Her eyes went sharp and still in the way I recognized from childhood, from every argument we'd ever had where she realized she wasn't going to win by being loud. Fine, she said, fine. If that's how you want to treat your own family. She went to her room. I heard her door close. I sat at the table alone for a while, and then I got up and washed both our coffee cups because that is the kind of person I am, apparently. She didn't bring it up again for 4 days, and neither did I. We moved around the house like two people navigating a room that had gotten smaller. She was polite in the surface-level way that meant she was waiting for something. I was polite in the surface-level way that meant I was done waiting. On the 5th day, she sat down across from me at breakfast and said, I've been thinking about what you said, and I think the issue is you don't understand what I've been going through. I put down my fork. She spent the next 20 minutes explaining that reselling was not a real income, it was more of a side project, that she'd been struggling with her mental health since Derek left, that running a business was actually incredibly stressful and she was barely keeping it together, and that for me to sit here and make her feel like a burden after everything she'd sacrificed for our relationship was honestly kind of devastating. I let her finish. I want you to move out by the end of the month, I said. She stared at me. I'll help you find listings, I said. I'll give you a good reference. I'll cover your first month of movers if you need it. But I need you out by the 30th. She stood up so fast her chair scraped back against the floor. You're kicking me out, she said. Your own sister. Because of money. Because of honesty, I said. And then she said the thing I will probably hear in my head for a long time. She pointed at me across the breakfast table in my kitchen, in my house, and she said, You have always been like this, you have always been jealous of me. You have always wanted what I have, and when you finally had something I needed, you used it against me. You're not being fair, Claire, you never have been. I felt something go very quiet inside me. Because I have thought a lot, over the years, about whether I was jealous of my sister. I have turned it over honestly, in the middle of the night, in therapy, in the margins of my own understanding of myself. And what I have concluded, slowly and carefully, is this. I was not jealous of Amber. I was grieving something I never had. There is a difference. Jealousy wants what someone else has. Grief mourns what it was never given. I was never jealous of my sister's easier road. I was sad, sometimes, that no one seemed to notice I was walking a harder one. But I didn't say any of that, I just said, the 30th, Amber, and I got up from the table and went to get ready for work. She called my mom that same afternoon. My mom called me that same evening. I let it go to voicemail the first time, and the second. On the third I picked up, because I knew she would drive 3 hours if I didn't, and I was not prepared for that. She was calm in the way, that meant she was very carefully not yelling. Amber says you're making her leave, she said. I'm asking her to find her own place, yes. She said you want money from her. Back payments. That's not quite how I framed it, I said, but yes. Claire, she's your sister. She's been through a hard year. She's been running a business from my home without telling me, Mom. She's been making money. She told me she couldn't afford $300 a month. A pause, then, softly, you know Amber has always had a harder time with stability than you do. There it was. I've heard that my whole life, I said. And every time I hear it, it means the same thing. It means I'm the one who's supposed to absorb the consequences of that. That's not what it means. It is though. She has a hard time, so I should ask for less. She's struggling, so I should give more. I bought a house with 6 years of savings and she moved in and used it as a business address and didn't tell me, and somehow the story you're hearing is that I'm being unreasonable. My mom was quiet for a long moment. Then, I just don't want you two to lose each other over something like this. Something like this, I said. She winced. I could hear it. Claire, did she tell you about the LLC? I asked. The Etsy shop, the 2 years of sales? Another pause. No, she admitted. Okay, I said. I love you, Mom. The 30th. I hung up. The calls after that came in waves. My mom, twice more. Amber, 6 times in one evening. A number I didn't recognize, which I figured out later was Marcus, which told me something about how that conversation in my kitchen had been reported. I texted Amber once, clearly, calmly. I meant what I said. No anger, no elaboration. She moved her stuff out over 3 days, mostly while I was at work, which I appreciated. She left a coffee mug I liked at the back of a cabinet, which I'm choosing to believe was an accident. She left the ring light behind the bookshelf. I donated it. The morning after her last box was gone, I walked through my house alone. Just walked through it, room by room, without any particular destination. I stood in the guest room doorway and looked at the empty bed and the bare nightstand and the indentations in the carpet where her boxes had lived for 2 years, and I felt something I'm not sure I have the right word for. Not quite relief, not quite sadness. Something cleaner than both of those. Something that felt like the air after a long rain. I went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat by the south-facing window, the one with the good light I used to grow plants in, and I thought about all the mornings I'd sat here and felt vaguely guilty for wanting my own home to feel like mine. All the times I'd told myself I was being too rigid, too focused on fairness, too unwilling to just relax and be generous. All the times I'd watched those packages pile up on my porch and told the tight feeling in my chest to be quiet. I wasn't being too rigid. I was being trained, the same way I had always been trained, to ignore what I needed so someone else could have more. There were harder days after that. My mom called less, but when she did call, there was a careful neutrality in her voice that felt like a verdict. Amber sent one long message, almost 2 weeks after she left, that I read once and did not respond to. In it, she said she hoped I was happy now, that she'd always thought I was the practical one, but she hadn't realized how practical meant cruel, and that she genuinely hoped I'd find peace because clearly I hadn't found it yet. I read it again later that night, sitting in the same window. And I noticed something. There was not a single line in it that asked how I was. Not a single acknowledgement of what I'd told her. Not one sentence that started with, "I understand," or "You're right," or "I should have told you." It was 2 paragraphs about her feelings and exactly nothing about mine, which was, when I thought about it, a fairly precise summary of our dynamic for most of my adult life. I didn't write back. Not out of anger. I just genuinely did not have anything to say that would make a difference to someone who had read 2 years of our history and come away with the conclusion that I was the problem. I kept the plant in the window. I got 2 more, actually, a pothos and a small fiddle-leaf fig. I had no business owning but bought anyway because I wanted to and I could. Some mornings I wake up and the quiet still catches me off guard, the way good things do when you're not used to them. No footsteps from the guest room, no packages on the porch. No one in my kitchen making coffee without asking if I wanted any. Just the particular stillness of a house that is entirely yours, not because you're alone in any painful sense, but because everything in it is exactly what you chose. I have been asked by more than one person whether I did the right thing. My coworker, carefully. My mom, less carefully. Even a friend who heard a version of the story and said, "I get it, but she's your family, you know?" I know she's my family. That's never been the question. The question is whether family is a reason to accept dishonesty or whether it's supposed to be the one relationship where honesty should cost you nothing to give. I've been thinking about that for months now, and I keep landing in the same place. Love is not a lease you don't have to read. It doesn't mean nothing is owed and nothing matters, and the person who has less takes from the person who has more until the scales balance somewhere nobody ever agreed to. Love is supposed to mean you don't have to hide what you're doing from the person you're doing it to. Love is supposed to mean when someone sits down across from you and says, "I need something from you," you don't tell them they're being heartless. My sister needed a place to stay, and I gave her one. She needed time, and I gave her that too. What I didn't agree to give her was my address, my goodwill used as a free subsidy for a business she was quietly building while telling me she had nothing, and the corner of my life she occupied without ever once asking whether the shape she was taking up was comfortable for me. I don't think I was too harsh. I think I was late. I think I should have had the conversation at month 3 when she made me feel guilty for bringing up $300. I think I should have said earlier that temporary means something specific, that love doesn't negate logistics, that the fact that I wanted to help her didn't mean I wanted to hand her the keys to a version of my life she hadn't worked for. But I'm learning. That's what I keep reminding myself. This is me learning. So here's what I actually want to know. Because I've been sitting with this long enough that I've stopped being sure about the edges of it. Was I wrong to ask her to leave? Was there a version of this where I handled it differently, more gently, and we came out the other side still okay? Or was the ending always going to be this one, and I just sped up the timeline by finally saying what was true? I don't know. I really don't. And I'm curious what you think, because I've been inside this story long enough that I've lost my ability to see it from the outside. But I'll tell you this much. This morning, I woke up, made my coffee, sat in the window with my slightly struggling fiddle-leaf fig and my very thriving pothos, and the only notification on my phone was a reminder I had set for myself. No voicemails. No guilt, dressed up in worried voices. No decisions that needed making before I'd finished my first cup. Just mine. Just quiet. Just Saturday morning light coming through a window in a house I bought with my own hands, in a life I am, for the first time in a long time, actually living.